is you're going to get a tube of JB Weld, and you're going to just glue it in there.
Right to the top of the piston. Well, John, we're back, and we have decided that 3 wasn't enough. We decided there should be a bonus.
Yeah.
We thought that if you're going to be going through the adventure of resurrecting an old motorcycle,
Yeah.
that we did kind of leave the secret part of the triangle out, and that's the back side of the triangle.
Yeah. We focused really hard on what normally is your
Right.
hierarchy of problems.
Yeah.
But you could go the bad route.
And I would like to call out that you'll notice we've had a wardrobe change. And this is courtesy of James' mom, Diana. She made this shirt, 100% of it from the start to the back. And you'll see it's resplendent with motorcycles. There's CB350s on here, there's CB750s on there. This shirt was made for me by a human being, literally made for me with motorcycles on it, thanks to Diana Robertson. So that's cool. And we have cocktails.
We've upped our drink game.
So I don't believe that we can have cocktails without having fun shirts on.
I think it's in order.
Aloha shirt, got a good cocktail.
Oh,
so we got
Aloha.
some good flair in them here. We got some good bourbon here. So it's a nice, fun cocktail for us tonight. Now, that part of the equation that we missed on, the part that we kind of left out.
Yeah, I mean, all too often what's overlooked is compression.
Yeah.
And I realized that I forgot when we took the spark plug out, one of my favorite compression tests is the old thumb in the spark plug hole compression test.
Stick your finger in it.
I mean,
Yeah.
realistically, you put your thumb over it, you hold it as firmly as you can.
Yeah.
You kick it or have somebody kick it or
Right.
turn it over with the electric start.
Yeah.
You really shouldn't be able to hold your finger
There's
or
no
thumb
way.
over that hole.
Yeah. There's absolutely
When it turns
no
over,
way.
it should go poof and blow air past your
I've
thumb.
never met anyone who can keep their thumb on the hole.
You can't, I mean, that should be at least 100 PSI.
Yeah,
You're not
and they
gonna be able-
do. And most compression checkers, they don't thread in. They just have a big rubber nipple on them. And that is what you jam in the hole.
Those are preferable. The ones that I don't even like the ones that thread in. It's just sort of a pain in the ass, to get them threaded in and everything. That is really, if you're doing 4 cylinders, you just put it on
Very
there.
quick. Yeah.
And I know you've said before, you like the 3 to 4 or 5 kicks.
I like 5 kicks, wide open throttle. And I mean that to the point of wide open throttle where if your throttle won't open all the way up, I want you to get something in there. If you got to diddle it or you got to put a popsicle stick in there, whatever you have to do. But I've seen a compression reading vary by 20 PSI just by having the carburetor less than 100% open. And when these companies came up with the pressures that they deemed to be optimal for these bikes to run, they did it with no restrictions.
You could even take the carburetor off.
It's fine. It doesn't hurt you to take the carb off to do a compression check. It doesn't hurt you to hold that throttle open somehow. If your throttle cable's not connected to your grip for some reason, time took it away, and now that throttle cable the throttle needs to be held open, definitely do that. Because my rule has always been, keep that throttle wide open and give it 5 strong kicks. And now, in a 2-stroke, not so hard to do. But in a 4-stroke, no matter how hard you kick, you're kind of getting the same piston speed for most of it. So in that case, it might be good to use that electric starter, just to, for a tip. Also, if your bike is a 4-cylinder bike, take the other 3 spark plugs out, take them all out, and check the compression without the compression of the other cylinders slowing you down. And that's a way to get a good reading. I've had people come in and say, yeah, the compression was really, really bad. Compression was really low. But then I take all the spark plugs out and I test them one at a time and realize, well, actually, no, the compression is just fine. You weren't getting a full spin because you had the other spark plugs in and they were creating a ton of resistance on that test.
So the bad news with compression, if you don't have it or don't have enough of it, is that it could be a serious problem.
It really is usually a serious problem.
The good news is it might not be, and you might not have to completely rebuild your motor.
Right.
A lot of times, maybe yes,
Yeah.
but there are some things that could cause low compression that might just be a simple valve adjustment.
Yep.
Or something like that. If your valves are not closing all the way or are dirty, you might just need to, adjust your valves.
Right.
And adjusting your valves might return your compression.
Do you know that when most motorcycles, when people talk about, well, I need to do a valve adjustment every so often, every 10,000 miles or 15,000 miles or 5,000 miles, what people forget is the valve adjustment that they're doing, it's not to make the valves close better. It's really not. What's happening is you are dialing out. Valves tend to get tighter. Yeah, they do. So they don't get looser. People would think that the motor's being run for a period of time, the valves would get looser. They really don't. They actually get tighter. So
you must have lash.
Yes, exactly. And the lash goes away. And when the lash goes away, what happens is you end up opening and closing that valve at the wrong time. It's really what it comes down to. And so if you have something as silly as a stuck valve, a valve that's just hanging up, that's really something we come across on these old bikes all the time, is a valve that's simply not, the spring tension is not enough to restore the valve to its open position.
Usually a bike that's been left outside.
Yep.
Or in a moist condition.
Yep, exactly.
That's when you want to look at valves that are hanging up, and that's if you have any water in the motor, if you have a situation where somehow water got in the air box and it's gotten into the motor, that's what makes valves.
And that's what we see most frequently. So more likely than a stuck ring even is a valve that's hung up, a valve that is just not operating the way it should, because inside the collet where the valve runs, there's corrosion, and that valve is not being able to come down on its own. It's only the force of the spring that pushes it down, unless you got a Ducati and you've got Desmos where it's actually got a positive energy pushing that valve down. Really what's happening is that valve is just hung. So when that valve gets snagged or the valve gets hung, that's why you're not going to get compression in that cylinder. And what John was talking about, that thumb test, that's the easiest way to find out if you've got a stuck valve.
If the motor's turning over and you're not getting a good firm pop,
right,
you probably have low compression.
Exactly.
Now you might want to go to the now get your compression tested and get a number on it. But that's the quickest, easiest field expedient way to do it.
And now there is the advanced class. The advanced class would be using a leak down test. So that would be when we know the valves are closing, but we're still not making compression. So if we know the valves are going up and down, if we've physically taken the peepers out of the valve covers, we have visible evidence of the valves opening and closing, or maybe
your valves might not be going up and down at all. You might have a busted cam chain.
Absolutely.
You might have some, or there's stuck,
Yep. If we see the valves opening and closing, right, the next thing we would do is we would do a leak down test, because then what we're doing is we're just putting some air pressure into the motor, and then we'll know based on where that air leaks out. So you can hear the air leaking out via the exhaust. You have an exhaust valve that's not seating. If you hear the air leaking out through the carburetors or the air box, well, then you know that you have an intake valve not seating. And if you're not getting either of those, well, then you can almost guarantee through a leak down test that it's the rings that are stuck. And that's kind of when you get into that sort of Hail Mary situation. Rings that are stuck.
You'll get compression.
Yeah.
You just won't get enough.
You won't get nearly enough. And that's the difference. If you see that 60 PSI or 70 PSI, that's the trick. A lot of people will see that. And why I'm so crazy about having the throttle wide open, why I'm so crazy about giving it multiple kicks or letting that starter run a while, is we need to see what the motor can build. Getting that number over 100 is really important, because in that 60 range, where it would be if you didn't have the throttle wide open, or it would be if you didn't give it 5 kicks, that's where we're worried about stuck rings. And that can be a whole other can of fish right there. And with that, we got to swamp the motor with, PB Blaster or some other chemical product to hopefully wake those rings up and get those rings to release.
I go back to my carb clean thing though.
Yep.
No amount of Italian tune-up, no amount of soaking.
It's going to free those rings up.
It's going to free rings up. I've rebuilt motors. I've replaced pistons that had stuck rings. And let me tell you, when they're stuck rings, it's a lot to get the rings off the piston.
It really is. Yeah.
I mean, and that's if you're going to be cheap and just try to reuse a piston that has
most of the time you'll end up
generally
breaking.
just want to throw that shit away and get
just
a new piston and rings.
And that's a big thing. So when you think about compression isn't just put your thumb over the hole and go for it. Once you know you've got that compression, if the bike's still not willing to run for you, or it's really, really running poorly, that's when you might have that worst possible scenario, which is that 60 to 70 pounds per square inch.
Because it'll run
Yep.
on some compression, it just won't run good.
It won't run well at all. And the more you put a load on it, the more demand you put on that motor, the more it's going to show you its failure. And as it shows you that failure, that's when you got to think, oh man, I hope this isn't stuck rings. Because we all know that means that top end's coming off. That means you're into a much, much bigger job at this point. So those, I feel like...
Indicators of stuck rings too is when you have blow-by, it's going to make you blow oil through your breather. So if you have a bike that's running, but it's like blowing oil through its breather, or you're getting oil smell out the tailpipe.
Good indication. If you get oil or you get black smoke out the tailpipe, very good indication that you've got oil leaking past your rings. Yep.
Black smoke can be fuel, like when it's too rich.
Way too rich.
Usually with oil, it tends to be white. You have white smoke. And you'll smell 10W40 burning through your motor.
Pretty clear, yeah. And that's a good indication you got a stuck ring, because remember, on these piston rings, there's more than just one ring. So the idea being there's a couple, 3 opportunities for these things to get stuck. And a motor that's been sitting in the same place for a long time is very, very easy for that ring, because we have non-homogeneous metals in there. So that tends to create the idea, the corrosion loves that. So anytime you have 2 or 3 different types of metals getting close to each other.
Your aluminum piston isn't going to rust, but those cast steel
well, the cast steel rings, iron rings, what happens is they get a little corrosion around them, and the corrosion grows in all the directions. And it creates little roots like a tree. And those little roots of that cast iron ring will go into the aluminum. And there is no getting that shit out. So
there is zero tolerance. And when your rings are in their grooves, they're very tight tolerances.
So that's a really, really important thing. So when you check that, again, trying to get this bike, resurrecting this bike, bringing her back from the dead, in that situation, when you've got that low or no compression, I hate to say it, but I'd rather have no compression. For me, I'd rather have no compression. Valves is something I can chase down pretty easily. But when it's stuck rings.
The other thing is valve timing. I've encountered at least a half a dozen motorcycles where it seemed like everything was good, and sometimes you'll actually get good compression because the valves are both closed, but they're not closed at the right time. Or if you're going to get compression somewhere, but that's a case where you're turning it over and you're like, but wait a second, the piston's going down, but the exhaust valve is open. Like you're like, what?
And that's a big thing too. When somebody says, I did this, or somebody says, I just did this, be very careful, because the likelihood that they did it wrong is pretty strong. If it was running and then they did something and now it's not running, that's a good place to start. We've seen motors come in that were timed 180 degrees out. Not actually uncommon.
So what you do there is you go and you look at your timing marks. You find your timing marks on their flywheel, on the cam.
And that's when you need that owner's manual, that service manual. You have to have it at this point. If you're going here, you need to have a service manual.
Static valve timing check. And make sure that when your piston is at top dead center, both valves are closed. And they're,
And these manufacturers have built some really sneaky traps in here for you too. There's this whole PFTF, these timing marks that on motorcycles, you'll be like, well, that's clearly the left cylinder, and that's clearly on compression, and that's clearly your exhaust. No, it's not. It's actually the Honda, when I think about it, the Honda 350s, there was a bit of a problem with timing marks where it can really confuse you and cause you to set the exhaust valve completely wrong.
T mark versus F mark.
Yeah, exactly. And that will be a trap every single time you get into it. And I always consult the book. Every time I do one of these, I crack the book open because I don't trust myself. I know I've been caught on it before. So if that's the case, you'd better go into that with a good Haynes manual.
If you have a single overhead cam motor, the best way to, real quick check to see if your valves are tight. Rotate it over. You want to line it to the F mark, actually.
F, for fire.
And then grab your rocker arms and see if you can slide it, move and wiggle them side to side, and see if you have any little tickety-tickety. Sometimes you won't feel much of, especially if they're like at 2,000ths or 3,000ths, but if you can slide them side to side, they're not tight.
And we have a weird statement that is counterintuitive. We say a tappy valve's a happy valve.
Tappy tap, it's a happy tap it.
That's right. And we've been saying this forever. Legitimately. Because people are like, oh, I checked the motor out, it's great, it's not making any weird noises. Oh, no, there's one noise I want to hear. Because if I'm revving a motor up and I'm not hearing that noise, I'm knowing that it needs to be adjusted. I'm knowing that somebody was like, oh, that seems like too much work. And they probably thought that 10,000 miles ago, which means they have been grinding into their cam for the past 10,000 miles. When I take that valve cover off and I look at that cam, it's going to be blue. It's not good for anybody. It really does create a situation that's hard to walk back from.
I've done a little bit of therapeutic, like I give it an extra lash. I'll give it 6,000.
Yeah.
I'll open those up and I'll run it for a while. I'll just let it run. Let those valves reseat themselves. Make sure they're not touching, even when it's as hot as it can get, that nothing is keeping them open.
That's exactly it. So that's compression. When we get
do your valve timing when the engine's hot.
Oh.
If you can. As hot as you can tolerate.
This is no joke. When you check your valve timing, when you check your valve clearances, the motor has to be cold. This is going to screw everybody's head up. Yes, when we check our valve clearances, when we check things, they have to be cold. All the owner's manuals, all the books will tell you it has to be cold when you check it. But as we've learned, when you set it, it's better if the motor is hot. The reason for that is we've scared out all the expansion. So you've already leaned into it a little bit. And that's something that we've both learned, that I tend to, like, if the motor says between 5 and 6 or between 4 and 6 thou, I'll tend to go 6 if the motor's hot.
The metal expands when it heats up. Therefore, you lose clearance.
You lose clearances. It all goes away because it stretches, everything gets bigger. So that's a little thing we've learned from working on bikes for a really long time. So I think we got that about nailed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't resurrect a bike after that.
Again, when you're looking in the spark plug hole, if you see a little dime-sized hole in the top of your piston.
Hey, what if the top of the piston looks like somebody just ran a chisel in there and took 27 shots at it?
You're going to get a tube of JB Weld, and you're going to just glue it in there.
Right to the top of the piston.
Or take the
I found if you take a bolt and put a bolt through the top of the piston with a nice big washer on it, you're good to go. It works totally fine.
And then some bikes you can service. Some bikes you can get the head off. Some bikes you could fix valve issues without having to pull them.
Not most of them.
A lot of them.
Unfortunately, not most of them. And that's the hardship of agreeing to be a motorcycle mechanic, right? That's the one thing unfortunately, we must stare down.
Sometimes it's got to come out.
Yep, that's just it. That's what we're into. If we're into old bikes, that's what you accept. So that was cool. We just did a thing. You guys, if you liked that, if you had a great time, this would be a really cool time to hit that subscribe button. I know everybody at this point is like, smash the subscribe button. But honestly, look, it's free. Hit the subscribe button. You'll be notified when Steve drops these things. Steve and Fernando are working really, really hard to give you guys something that looks great. We're doing our best to make it entertaining. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. It doesn't matter. It's free. That's it. Ride fast and take chances. I did that. I knew that was just, I was just mean. Press the red button. Get us out of here. So I don't care where you're from. This is open to you if you're on planet Earth. If you win, we're going to send it to you. I don't give a damn where you are.
Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
The crazier, the better.
It would be an honor for me to send it to you in a far-off location. So remember, tell your friends, get together, and put together a fun video or a fun story about your moto story, and we're going to put it on Moto Stories with Unkie Phil. Now, guys, there are rules, because there have to be rules. We can't just have you guys
We're not like sticklers on rules here, but
I know, but
there's always a line.
All right, there's always a line. So here's the rules. 1, if you're going to shoot us a video, either send us the whole damn video,
right,
and all the file transfer methods account.
Because we're going to want everybody to watch it.
Yes. Or send us a link to a video you've already got somewhere.
If you're already YouTube famous, we're cool with that too.
I'm okay with that too. Exactly. Now, maybe it's just a really, really good story, like you're really good on the clickety-clickities, then send it to us. Okay guys, now how do you submit them? Well, submitting them is rather easy. So we have managed to have this place called Moto Stories with Unkie Phil at gmail.com. And that's going to appear probably down here somewhere in this general area if Steve and Fernando have got their stuff together. It's going to be right down there, and you're going to send any evidence you have. Yeah, you said it right there. Right. And when you send them to us, make sure you send the video or a link to the video, because that's the repository. That's where they're going to be. That's where they will all be heavily scrutinized. Literally, artisanally judged for their integrity, their veracity, and their silliness.
I'm afraid we're going to get so much content, it's going to be crazy.
Yeah, it'll be one guy posting 200 videos. Okay,
pics.
We know what it's going to be. Yeah, I hate to say it, but we know that's where it's going. But it's probably not. I'll bet you these people are going to impress us, because it's all going to go, every single one of them, Moto Stories with Unkie Phil at gmail.com. It's all going to go right there. Your videos, your link to your videos, your script, your Sanskrit.
We can't actually read.
We can read. You can do it. If you want to impress me with a spoken word, by God, just send me an audio track. That's all I need, because we'll post it nonetheless. But there's big, big prizes to be had. Or more or less, we'll make you internet famous for like a minuscule. Sure. Exactly. Check me out. Look at them. These idiots talked about me. Right. That could be all you get. But in any case, it'll be fun, and we haven't done it yet. So we've always had fun with things we haven't done yet.
And we'd like to give back to our listeners.
It would be fun. There's no better way to get a part of this than to be a part of this. All right, guys. Well, ride fast and take chances. Subscribe. Press the red button, Steve. Get us out of here. Okay, good.